Welcome to FitBody Lifestyle, the show where we dive deep into the world of fitness, health, business, relationships, and the art of living a balanced life. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Greg, and we're here to give you the benefit of our experiences in the fitness and bodybuilding industry, the corporate world, running a business, personal development, and building healthy relationships.
Whether you're sweating it out in the gym, hustling in your business, or seeking balance in your everyday life, you're in the right place.
So lace up those sneakers and grab that water bottle, and let's get ready to transform our minds, our bodies, and our lives. Hey everybody, welcome to another version or edition of FitBody Lifestyle. It's been a little while since we've been on the set today, so we're a little rusty. Give us a little bit of time to grace into this, but today I'm joined by my lovely bride here, Jamie. Thank you. Sorry, I know that was like the most awkward opening.
Can we redo
real.
that?
No, we're not going to redo it. We're going to show people real, and that was real.
Okay.
So that we're going to be real. We're going to be real,
all
authentic, authentically real, even if it's awkwardly. Okay, awkwardly real. We like real. Okay. So today we're going to talk about an important topic, which is interpreting. Let's maybe expand it. We had originally talked about interpreting judges' feedback, but let's go a little bit broader and talk about getting, receiving, and interpreting judges' feedback after a competition. Is that good?
That sounds great.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe where we started out is let's paint the picture, which is you've just completed your show, and whether you are a first-time competitor or a seasoned competitor, first show to 50th show, whatever the case may be, let's start. You've prepped for weeks to get ready for the show. Arguably you've prepped for longer than that if you've been living a bodybuilding lifestyle, and you've just competed. And why get the feedback? What's the importance of that?
Well, the whole reason really we're there is for the feedback. So the why is we want to know how we can continue to improve. So if we don't know what the judges are seeing or what areas that we're lacking in, what areas we're strong in, then, we're going to be flying blind and maybe not making the improvements we need to make.
Right. And so I would add to that is that we really encourage our athletes to go to the show for feedback. Trophies are trophies, but the sport of bodybuilding is a sport of and what we talk about is a sport of failure, where you fail forward. You fail, you evolve, you fail, you evolve. But beyond that, going for the feedback is really the prize that you want to get, because the feedback is going to help you get better as an athlete. It helps you understand where you are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. As coaches, we advise on that every check-in with an athlete for sure, but until you're actually standing on stage in stage conditions next to other competitors, that feedback is always going to be limited. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, there's a lot of things to consider, and I know we're going to talk about a lot of the things that you need to consider in terms of, how you intake that, how you apply it, and that kind of thing. And I think that you're missing an opportunity if you don't at least ask for that feedback.
Because I do think some athletes don't find the value in it. And
and some coaches, I've had athletes tell me, my coach told me not to get feedback, that the coach already knew everything, and I do think that, that's something, even as long as I've been doing this, you and I are at shows every single weekend. We're talking to the judges. We're putting athletes on stage. I'd venture to say we might even have a better eye than some of the judges, just because of how much we're doing this. And at the same time, I learned something new every single weekend. And, it is difficult sometimes, to be subjective when you're looking at yourself, or even when you're looking at your client. You're seeing them all the time. They look amazing. And then they get up, next to other athletes, and then you can start to find flaws that maybe you didn't see before, or maybe just areas that they need growth in, so, some of those things, we'll notice from looking at the pictures, from watching it in person. And then other times I just really want to understand, what were the judges seeing? Why did they make the decisions they made? Because, they're looking at it through their lens. They're looking at it, from their own perspective. And so it's really interesting to me sometimes to, even sometimes if I get feedback and initially I'm like, that's not right. and I take a moment to digest it and go back and look over it, I can go, okay, yeah, I do see where they were coming from on that. So, but I wouldn't even have maybe questioned it or gone to that next level to dig deeper and consider more had I not had that conversation.
And I will say that I think the philosophy of not getting feedback is akin to thinking that you're the smartest person in the room and that you have nothing to learn. And I don't, maybe I do mean that a little critically. And I guess I do. I will say that I'm going to mean that critically because I do think that at least getting the feedback allows you to then determine whether or not you're going to apply that feedback or not. But until you know what it is, how do you make that judgment of, I know what that feedback is, or I know how you look, or I know, what you look like on stage relative to these other athletes, which may be 100% true, but maybe it's only 99.1% true. And maybe that additional 0.1% that you get from listening to another perspective, and that's really what this is. This is, this ties into a larger topic of feedback, and which we've talked about before. But and if you'll indulge me a second, and I talk about the story of feedback, which is the Christmas of 1976, where I got a gift from my parents for Christmas that I really loved, and I got a gift from my aunt that, while I appreciated the effort, it was nothing that I was ever going to really use. And both things were really valuable to me, but one thing I wore immediately and was a treasured gift, and the other one was one that I looked at and appreciated the love that had gone into it, but I put it in my closet and never pulled it out again. And that is always your choice with feedback, is that you get the choice of what you're going to do with it and how you're going to apply it. But what I can safely say without any hesitation whatsoever is that until you get the feedback, you don't know what to do with it. So you've got to get the feedback in order to figure out then, how do I apply that? Or do I apply it? Which is kind of really the first question is, do I apply that? I think in my mind.
Right. Well, and before, we move forward, I do want to talk just a little bit about how to get the feedback, because I do think that can be a little confusing, and not every show are the judges available for feedback. So it's something, you may even want to think about when you're choosing your show. I mean, you may want to reach out and ask the promoter, will there be an opportunity for feedback? Will the judges stay after for feedback, or is it something to where I could email someone for feedback and that kind of thing? Because it isn't available at every show. So I do want to preface that. And so it's something to maybe find out ahead of time, or if you're going to check-ins at the show, ask at that point. They always ask, does anybody have any questions? And then it's crickets, crickets, crickets. That's a great place to ask questions. Where do I get my feedback after the show's over? So I did want to mention that some shows are going to allow you to talk directly to the judges. I really like that, because having that ability to have a conversation can be really helpful. And, ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions, get clarification. If I'm there, I'll go in and ask questions with my athletes, because I know sometimes as an athlete, you may not know the questions to ask. But if you're not sure what they mean when they're telling you the feedback, or if it's vague, like, for example, there was a recent show where one of the judges told an athlete, you need to work on your posing. So that's very broad. Like, where was the pose? Was it my front pose? Was it my back pose? Was it the transitions that were off? Was it, I was lacking core control? Like, there are some very specific things that we want to know. Otherwise, you may go work on your posing, but you may not work on the right things. I mean, you may have thought that what they meant by that was completely different. So don't be afraid to ask questions. If it's a very vague answer they're giving, ask that additional question and just help me to, tell the judge, like, help me to understand a little bit better. I'm not sure exactly, where to go, with this feedback, and get more details. So if you can have that in-person conversation, to me, that's going to be the most optimal situation. The other next best situation is they'll allow you to email one of the judges. I know, especially at some of the bigger national shows, sometimes they'll give a specific person's email. At those national shows, usually there's judges staying after. And I know a lot of times people are so anxious to go get food and things like that. And I totally understand that. And you're going to get better, more valuable feedback if you stay. And you've worked this hard, you can wait a couple more hours or whatever it's going to take to get the feedback. That's just my advice on that. I feel like it's valuable. But if you can't, for whatever reason, and that can happen, then do the email and just make sure you ideally are going to include your number, your division, your height, the height class you were in, and then a link to your pictures on NPC News Online, or if you have photos, that you got from the photographer, whatever, you can do that as well. But you want to make this as easy as possible for the judges to be able to find their notes on you, figure out who you are. I know sometimes the judges will get frustrated because they'll just say, "Hi, I'm Jane Doe. Can I get feedback?" And then sometimes the judges don't even know what show they were in because they're judging shows back to back. It may have been 2 or 3 weeks ago. So they need to know what show you were in, what division you competed in, what class you were in, what your competitor number was, and then, ideally some link to some pictures.
Right. I think that including that in the subject line of feedback requested for Patriots Challenge, 2024 Patriots Challenge, or 2024 USA's, or whatever the show is, and then your name and your athlete number or your number and your class, ideally, would be those 3 elements that you would want to make sure you include in the feedback. And I do think individual photos are very helpful for the judge to see, but I also think including a comparison shot, if you have that, is also very helpful so they can remember where you were in the lineup. If you're going to put a comparison shot in there, I would suggest that you circle yourself if you can, using whatever digital medium you on the iPhone. It's super easy to do that, but just identify which one you are on stage, whether it's by color of the suit or where you are in the stack, whether it's 6 athletes on stage, 5 athletes, whatever that is. I think giving that context, again, you hit the nail on the head, really, which is whatever you can do to make the judge's job easier to give you feedback, because the focus should not be them finding you. The focus should be, what are the areas, what did they see that could have been better, or what did they see that you can improve on.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I do like the link to the NPC News Online, if there are pictures from that show. Most of the shows do have pictures on there. But the reason I like that is because there are usually comparison photos on there as well. So then that way they can find your individual photos. They know exactly who you are. And then they also, and if you haven't been on there, then you'll see each class is going to have the pictures and everybody ranked, in the placings. And then there's a little link that says comparison photos on each of those. So that's really nice. And you're absolutely right, because seeing somebody individually is not the same as seeing them next to the people they're compared to. And, and I know we're going to jump into the feedback itself, but that is something you have to consider. The more competitive the show is, I feel like the more accurate the feedback is going to be, just because you're going to be compared to, better physique. So say, for example, you go to a really small regional show, maybe there aren't as many people in your class, or the people in your class are more beginners and that kind of thing. Then you're just going to be getting feedback based on how you compared to those particular people. Now, when you go up to that next level, or you're at a bigger show, maybe you looked a little bit too hard or too muscular, whatever, for the division at a really small regional shows, but then you go to nationals and you're right on point. So that is, kind of in the interpreting section that we're going to talk a little bit about is, you have to take into account where you're at, who you're being compared to, because that's what the judges are giving you feedback on, what they saw that day with that particular group of athletes.
Right. And just from a mental state point of view or mental framework point of view, I do think, for example, one thing is, if we're at a show, we're always standing in line with our athletes to get the feedback. And partly we're doing that because we want to ask those clarifying questions. We want to make sure that we understand what the judges are seeing, along with what what the judging was. So we really want to have that understanding. If you're not with your coach, or if you don't have a coach, and you want to record the feedback, please, just as a matter of respect and courtesy, I think, ask the judge whether it's okay for them to record you, or whether it's okay for you to record the judge's feedback. A lot of judges will say yes. Some judges don't want to be recorded. So I just think it's a sign of respect to make sure that you're doing that. The other point that I was going to make, based on what you said, and this is very reminiscent of patient advocacy, if you will, of people going to the doctor and the doctor telling them something, and you as the patient may not completely understand it. And just because you're the scenario, the setting that you're in, you may not ask for those clarifying details to really make sure that you understand what your doctor's telling you. It's why patient advocates exist, is to help people help themselves, so to speak. And I do think speaking up and asking for those clarifying questions if you truly don't understand something is very helpful. It's not about really getting into a debate. Well, it's not telling the judge, well, that's not how I look or something. It's not that. It's really making sure when you say my posing, can you clarify that? What was it about my posing? Or if you say my shoulders need to be, fuller, what does that mean to you? Is that just my shoulders? Is it my upper back? Is it, just asking those questions to clarify, I think is really essential to making that feedback work for you.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing, I was just going to piggyback on when you said about the recording. I do think it's helpful. Like, and we ask our athletes a lot of times if they could record it, asking, of course, first. And then if the judge is not comfortable being recorded, then just have a notepad ready or open your notes on your phone and just take some notes in there. And we do that a lot as well. So that's perfectly fine too. It's just you're in the moment. And a lot of times, adrenaline's high, you've been on stage, or, you got prep brain and you're going to forget. So it's nice if you just are prepared to take some notes and then, figure out how to apply it from there.
And I've actually opened my digital recording, and as the judge is speaking, I'm basically parroting what the judge is saying to the athlete into my notes to have that for later. I'm not recording the judge, but I am recording myself, basically recording the feedback to make sure I have that as accurate as possible afterwards, because but I will tell you the one downside of that is that sometimes I'm so focused on recording the feedback that I'm not as attentive to what is being said. And so the two strategies I prefer is just to really listen and then pick out those points that I may need some additional clarity, and then step away, type my notes up, and then go on to the next one.
Yeah. One of the other things I always think about is that, there's been a lot of bodies across stage usually. And sometimes the judges are going off memory. Sometimes they've taken some notes and things like that. So, also if there's something that they're saying that I'm like, that doesn't sound quite right. Sometimes I'll say, and if you're an athlete, stay in your suit, that way, a lot of times I'll say, do you mind, maybe they say the shoulders weren't full enough. And I know this particular athlete maybe has bigger shoulders. And I'm thinking, maybe they could be mixing them up with a different athlete. I mean, it happens, we're all human. It goes really fast. They're writing notes very quickly. So sometimes I'll just tell them, will you hit a pose, for them to see? And then they might go, okay, well, maybe it wasn't, maybe they were full enough. Maybe it was just the way you were posing it or something like that. And then we can kind of start to get a little more specific, get a little bit more clarity on what they're looking for. So I think it does really help to ask questions. And if you have somebody there too, that understands, if you have your coach or whatever, that's super helpful as well.
Well, and I would add one thing that I agree with you. Keep your suit on, keep your number on. The more you can show the judge, hey, this is what I look like. And also keep in mind that if the judge is doing that, they're 2-3 feet away from you, versus when you're on stage, you're 30 feet away from them, and you're standing on stage in better lighting. You're standing on stage with other athletes.
You hope it's better lighting.
What's that?
I said you hope it's better lighting.
You hope it's better lighting, right. But you're standing on stage with other athletes. And so that is going to shape some of the feedback that you get as well. So a judge may say you need more shoulders, and then look at you 3 or 4 feet away from them and say, no, you don't need more shoulders. But when you were on stage relative to the other athletes, the shoulders may have been more apparent than they were with you standing 2 or 3 feet from the judge.
True. I mean, I think more often than not doing that, I've found out I've gotten more clarity, not less clarity. So I think that it's definitely worthwhile. And a lot of times what ends up coming out of that particular situation is adjustments to posing, because we can then play around with certain things. Like, say the judge says, you need a little bit more upper glute. Well, maybe the way they were turning their knees or turning their feet was, not showing the fullness in the upper glute. So we can play around with that. And then the judge will, oh, perfect. That's what I'm wanting to see. Now we just found an easy fix that's not going to take a year of growth. You know what I mean? So more often than not, I find that taking that little bit of time just to ask those questions, maybe look at a few things, run some things by them, but just be super respectful and come from curious. I think that really helps a lot, because, sometimes the judges are working hard all day, and people can sometimes come in hot, and frustrated and things like that. So coming from curious can be really helpful. And I find that that's going to make them more, open and willing to help teach and educate.
But let's talk about that, because I do think that's an element of getting feedback, which is, we talk about this all the time, but bodybuilding's a relationship sport. This is a small community, and being able to have that relationship with the judge, and I'm not talking about like, I'm not talking about like a friend relationship or anything, but I do think that making sure that you make a good impression on them is something that is helpful to you as an athlete. It establishes your brand. It establishes what you want. Do you want to be an ambassador for the sport, or are you just in it for, that win or whatever? But I guess the point is that recognize that this is a relationship sport, and part of getting that familiarity with the judge is them seeing you one show to the next and being able to see that progress. That is helpful. I don't know how else to say it other than that. I don't know if you would say it, would describe it any other way.
Well, I mean, yeah, I talk a lot about the relationships that we build. And, I know we're so focused on the win and the placing and everything else, but the relationships are meaningful. And that's, why we love the industry so much. And, it's like every show is like a reunion. And it's a lot of fun when you do start to build that respect and that, that sort of relationship, and the judges start remembering you, and then they're like you said, then they're able to point out the things that you have improved upon, or the things that you can continue to improve upon, because they're seeing you in multiple shows and things like that. So, I mean, it's like anything in life. If we come from a place of curious and we're respectful, then people are going to be a lot more forthcoming and a lot more willing to help us.
And that goes in with it. So as we get now into the specifics of the feedback and interpreting that, I think, well, let's talk about setting yourself up for success in that, which is first, wait around. Second, prepare yourself. And part of preparing yourself is making sure that you are in that receptive mindset of, hey, I am here to learn. I am here to embrace the real core of bodybuilding, which is continuous improvement. So I recognize that no matter how good I came in at this show, I can be better. So I'm curious as to, you judge how you think I can be better, not to argue with them about why you were the best on stage that day. So getting in that curious mindset, I think, is very helpful. I also think having pictures on your phone ready, pulled up, if you can do that, whether they were pictures that somebody took in the audience, or whether, NPC is pretty good about putting pictures online. It's not uncommon for us to have pictures available immediately, especially at the national shows, by the time you go up for your feedback. So have those pictures available. Wear your contest suit, keep your number on. You don't have to wear your heels. But what else would you suggest?
It would be helpful to have them with you.
Yes.
Because if you do decide to do a little bit of posing, it's nice to have them. No, I think that pretty much covers it, and then, then the next thing is kind of diving.
There's one other thing that they need to prepare. And you have reminded me of this on time. Food. So have some post-show waiting for feedback food, and not sugar. Okay, rice cakes, nut butter, some quick food that you can, if you got a protein source that you can get to satisfy yourself with. I would really watch the protein bars in that occurrence. I mean, if that's what you got, that's what you got. But sometimes the protein bars, because of the additives and everything that gets in there, that can upset your stomach. But like jerky works really well. Rice cakes work really well. Nut butter works really well. Is there anything else you would add to that list?
I mean, a lot of people will just bring a meal. I mean, we always tell our athletes to have an extra meal with them anyway. And, so if you're going to be waiting for feedback, a lot of times, our athletes will just go ahead and eat a meal. And then that way they're not standing there just super hungry and getting irritable and things like that. They're a little bit more relaxed and able to come and, be more present. I know some people will do a protein bar. It just kind of depends on how you digest things. I mean, usually I tell people stay away from the protein bars between prejudging and finals, because the sugar alcohols can bloat. But once the show is over, if that's something, that helps to satiate you, I don't think that's a horrible thing. It just depends on the individual.
I didn't mean to imply that it was horrible. I just would not be on my short list.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, I do think, just having a meal or having something there handy with you it's a smart idea. And that, that way too, you're a little more patient, because sometimes it can take a while. And, just if you are waiting, get to know people, hang out, have fun. Like, I know people get impatient, and I'm like, you've worked so hard for this. And so this is part of your show day. Embrace it and have fun with it.
And if we rewind the clock a little bit into setting yourself up for success, I do think going into a show, and particularly if you're going into a national show that's going to have higher numbers, but even the regional shows, set your family up set their expectations. Because a lot of times we'll get to shows and a lot of athletes have made plans with their family after the show for meals and everything. And while I love that and appreciate that, and that's another topic we can talk about building your circle and making sure that you've set yourself up with your family support, which I love. But part of that means that they've got to understand that the feedback is important. The feedback is part of the trophy, if you will. The feedback is really the thing that you're going for the show for, so that you can continue to evolve and be better. And letting your family know, hey, look, we should either plan a meal fairly late, or maybe we should do brunch on Sunday, which I think is the more successful strategy. Or hey, family, go up to the room and order DoorDash and have it waiting, and I'll be up as soon as I'm done with feedback. There's a lot of ways that you can set yourself up for success, but I do think that setting that expectation in your family members is really helpful, because if you as an athlete are feeling that pressure of, hey, people are waiting for me, that might be the thing that prevents you from getting the thing that you came to the show for, which is that feedback.
Yeah, and we see that a lot. I think that's a really, really great thing to bring up. And yeah, if you set the expectations before, because we a lot of times do not know what time the show is going to end. And so, sometimes it's 8:00 at night, sometimes it's 10:00 at night, sometimes it's midnight, so even when people are making reservations and then they feel panicked and stressed, and, it just kind of takes a little bit of the fun out of it. So you want to be able to see the thing all the way through. And I love the brunch the next day idea. If everybody came out to see, like, let's have brunch the next day and celebrate, that kind of thing. So I do think that's really great advice. And
I will say, it's not uncommon for us to get this feedback from an athlete where they will tell us that, in the line afterwards for feedback, they had a meal. And they prioritize protein, which is always what we suggest, but they had a meal and that actually satisfied them. So that really helped with those post-show cravings the night of, which can be a factor of both the food that you've eaten or not eaten that day of the show. It can be a factor of the emotional lift of, hey, I just did this show, I just did this incredible thing. And there's an emotional aspect to that can trigger some desire to eat or celebrate. But the athletes I know that have done a meal in line will always say, you know what, I'm not really craving those donuts that I thought I was craving, or I'm not really craving, that pie or that cake or whatever it is. My food cravings are actually pretty much in tow, which is really, I think, part of the success of that after show plan.
Yep. So whenever you do get to that opportunity to talk to the judge, there's 3 areas that I recommend, getting feedback on. One would be shape. The second would be conditioning, and the third would be presentation. So a lot of times if I'm walking up with an athlete and the judge is looking at their notes, they may say, conditioning was great. I want to see you with a little bit more upper glute, and work on your front pose. So those are your three categories. Sometimes they'll only give one thing. They might say, okay, I want to just see a little bit tighter. And I'll usually ask, okay, first of all, when we're talking tighter, does that fall into shape category where it's a matter of the person needed more muscle so that they looked tighter? Or does this fall into our conditioning category where you wanted to see them a little bit leaner? So I'll ask for that bit of clarification. I want to know specifically what are they seeing, because a lot of times the judge will go, oh, no. I don't want you any leaner. You're already, kind of pushing it. You're almost too lean. You need more shape. You need a little bit more size, a little bit more muscle in that area. So that's where, making sure you're very clear on each of those categories. How did I have enough muscle? And if I had too much in certain areas, or if I had not enough in certain areas, those are areas I need to address. Those are going to be a little bit more long-term goals for the most part. If you've got to bring down an area, we see this with the ladies a lot, where maybe the quads are overpowering the glutes a little bit. So we need to bring down the legs. We need to work on building up the glutes. That's not going to happen in weeks or months even. That's going to be an improvement season where that's going to need to happen. So that's a really important thing to establish is, and knowing what your goals are is really important too. If you're just wanting to stay at the regional level, which is which is great. I mean, we always encourage people, like, compete at every level before you're, in a hurry to get to the next level. But if you're, at that point where you're like, I'm really wanting to go to nationals next, that's where that's going to be a big factor, because a lot of times at those regional levels, maybe, you have enough muscle for that regional level, but maybe not for that national level. So I think that understanding your goal and then, asking for that clarification from the judges in each of the categories that I named, starting with the shape, factor. I just had a pro athlete compete for her first time back after having kids and being off for a long time, and the division's grown a bit. So she came in. I wanted her to take a little bit more time to build, but she did great. She placed in first calls in both her open and masters category at the pro show. But the feedback was a little bit more glutes density and a little bit more upper body. Conditioning was excellent. Posing was good. There's some things that we can work on, but just kind of starting just from that shape standpoint. So then the question is, do we want to do another show? She obviously did very well. So if she wanted to, that's fine. But if she wants to continue to move up, we know that those things that we need to work on are going to take a little bit more time. Those are going to be things we need to work on. So I like to bring this up because, these types of pieces of feedback are going to really dictate, what's done next, So kind of starting with that shape and then jumping into conditioning, because conditioning is something we can change quite quickly. So if the judge is giving us the feedback that we need to get a little bit leaner, so they may say, I want to see a little tighter. They usually won't say leaner, but if, you dig a little bit, okay, yeah, you just need to be a little bit leaner so we can see a little bit more of that separation, but the shape is all there. Okay, well, that's a good time to go, all right, that's an easy fix, especially if, you're still, if you haven't done a lot of shows and you're not run down, or, there's room in your life to do another show. Well, at that point, fine tuning, getting a little bit leaner, maybe coming back up, getting feedback again. Okay, is this where you want me to be? A lot of times we like to do a warm-up show before nationals, and that's usually where we're gauging conditioning, because we know we've got shape. Otherwise we wouldn't be going to nationals. We're looking to find that sweet spot for that individual and make sure conditioning is on point. And then of course, posing is again something that could be worked on fairly quickly, and especially if it's something that's an easy fix. If they're, we see this a lot with bikini athletes where they're really, pulling the shoulder up, and they want to see that shoulder relaxed. I mean, so there's some very, very simple to fix things a lot of times that can be identified. Sometimes it's just nerves, maybe they've practiced and then they get up there and everything just kind of goes to the wind, and, it's just a matter of getting back on stage and working through those nerves. But I did want to kind of bring up, because if the judge only gives you feedback on one of the categories I'm talking about, that's when I'll ask, okay, how was the presentation? Did you like the suit color, the hair, the makeup? Was posing good? Those things all fall into the presentation. How was our conditioning? Did we need to be any leaner? Did we need to fill out a little bit more? And do we have the shape that we need, or are there certain areas we still need to work on?
I was going to say that I think presentation seems like it's often an easy fix with the shoulder raise or not twisting enough or whatever the case is. But there is that other side where sometimes there are some issues with posing that it takes a little bit more practice to work on, which is like your energy or your confidence when you're posing. And you're right that sometimes that can be nerves, but other times it can simply be that I think people practice. So what I feel is that I think people practice so much in their posing, and technically they have the poses down, but energetically they're not able to deliver that confidence, that emotion, that positive feeling to the judges, and that takes a lot of effort, a lot more than I think people realize. I know that some of our successful athletes, one pro in particular I know, is always asking us about, what about my facial expressions, and when should I do this and when should I do that? And I love that she asked those questions, because she is thinking about not just one aspect of the presentation, she's thinking about all aspects of the presentation. And I think that, when you get on stage, if you are thinking about your posing, then you probably, your presentation is going to lack something. You should be at that point prepared enough that it's more just feeling the presentation, just listening to that music, allowing it to pass, and then trusting your preparation. And hey, if you make an error, you drop a glute, you drop a shoulder, you don't twist quite enough, okay, those things can be corrected. Yeah, that's right. Something happens. Oftentimes they paint it in their heads as way worse than whatever does appear. But when you actually are able to feel into those poses and project that energy, and I would just ask you this, for the viewers and listeners, is that think about plays that you've been to, think about dance recitals, think about any performance that you've been to, whatever it is, whether it's a rock group, whether it's a rock group, whether it's EDM. I love electronic music, and whether it's a play, a Broadway play, a high school play, whatever. And you know that there's a difference when the performer is projecting that energy versus when they are just mailing it in. We often talk about going to see Jersey Boys, and we saw 2 different performances from 2 different casts that perform it. And the first time we saw it, there was a much different energy presentation than the second one. The second one was still great, but it was not as good as the first one because part of it was the energy that the performers put into that presentation. It could have been the length of the run of the show. It could have been a whole bunch of different factors, but there was a difference in terms of what we felt, because we both felt the same thing energetically in that performance.
Yeah, and it does make a difference. And especially as you get into more and more competitive shows, then the energy and the confidence, those kinds of things, if it's really close between 2 athletes and one person's just selling it, looking confident, having fun up there, then the eye is going to be more drawn there. So, the fun thing about this sport is that there's so many things that we can keep working on improving. And that is the fun part. So when you're getting the feedback, looking at it from that perspective of this is exciting. This is something I get to work on. This is something I get to improve upon. There is no end game. I mean, even the top Olympians are constantly working on how can I improve? They're getting feedback. They have things to work on. So, I think it's important to not take things personally and just understand that this is to help you get better. And, we all have room for improvement, every one of us. And so when we're taking in feedback on an athlete, that's feedback on us as coaches. Did we bring this person in? Did we, pose them right? Did we give them the right, information? Did we, bring in the right conditioning and work the right areas in terms of shape and things like that? So I do think that, kind of stepping into now applying the feedback and I know there are times where you may get some conflicting feedback. So sometimes you talk to more than one judge on the panel. I think it is important to realize that everybody's filter is a little bit different. Everybody's lens is a little bit different. Even where they're sitting could be a little bit different. If a judge is dead center, it's a little bit different than looking at an angle if you're sitting all the way on the right or sitting all the way on the left. All those things are things to think about. Sometimes there will be those things. Sometimes they may misremember, that's where too, having the pictures or, that kind of thing. And sometimes there's a difference of opinion. I mean, this is a subjective sport. I know people get really upset about this, and we have to understand, that sometimes can be a difference of opinion. So I would look for the common thread, and then, use your own reason. And hopefully, you also have a mentor or coach, somebody you can run things by too, and, check in. We did have someone recently that was, at a small regional show and got feedback from a judge, which, to me is not going to be as valuable as say, getting in front of a judge at a bigger show or national show or that kind of thing. I do really like to put, the amateur athletes in a show that has a pro division, because you're going to typically have judges that do judge more at those higher levels and have a little bit, a lot of times a little bit more trained eye. So in this particular instance, the judge gave some feedback to this athlete that, on her posing that, I didn't think was going to behoove her as well at that next level. And it may have to do with the other athletes she was standing next to, because it was a really small show. So it was one of those things where, being able to explain to her, in this circumstance, this is what this judge was seeing, but at this next level, here's what we need to do. And then we put her in a bigger show and she got, that feedback that was more aligned with that next level. So I just think it's important to talk about, take everything in, and filter through, the pieces, look for the common threads, think about who it is that you're talking to. I mean, if you're getting feedback from the head judge at the nationals and the pro level, you're probably going to have some pretty good, meat there to work with. So just those are things to think about, and then, filter through, and then keep coming back, keep improving, keep asking for more feedback, and, and hopefully, applying it and being able to grow and improve.
And I do think context matters. And the context that's usually lacking when you're getting the feedback in that moment is that you're not necessarily standing next to the person that you were standing on stage with. And so it's not, I mean, we've seen this before or heard this before where athletes will get, I think the words that really become the most confusing sometimes are tighter, fuller, bigger. Those words require a little bit more explanation. And context matters with those because sometimes tighter is a relative term. Tighter could be in this show you were too tight, or in this show you were not tight enough. So think about the context of that. But at the next show, maybe it's going to be a bigger show where we expect there to be people to come in a different conditioning, because we've seen that variation from show to show. But being able to understand the context of that and interpret it. So I think what you hit on earlier, and I'm going to come back to that, is just be curious about this. And when you can receive the feedback and get the clarity that you need to by asking those follow-up questions if you need, and then just being curious about that and filtering it and saying, okay, this does apply or this doesn't apply, and recognizing, I was thinking of another aspect that we deal with all the time, which is, athletes will do a show year after, like a national show in year one, and then the same national show in year two. And in year one, they finish fifth, and in year two, they finish eighth. And they'll say, well, I didn't do as good at this show. And it's like, well, you're comparing apples and oranges, because unless all the athletes that you were on stage with the year before are in that same call out with you this show, in the same suits with the same judge and the same lighting, you're mixing variables that add context to why your placing may be different. If 3 athletes are in that lineup that were not in the lineup in the year before, well, the placings probably are going to be maybe different. Not probably, I should say maybe different. And so being able to contextualize this stuff, I think, is really a helpful additive for you individually to make sure that you're receiving it in the proper mindset, because that's really the target of feedback. And I think that was kind of one of the conclusions that we reached when we talked about feedback, is putting yourself in the right mind and an open mindset to receive this and then contextualize it. That's the key. That's the key to getting feedback that then you can apply moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny as you say that, I'm thinking about Masters Nationals, where we had 2 athletes that did not get their pro cards in the over 40, but did get their pro cards in the over 35, and it just happened to be the way the class, because there's more classes in the over 35. So the way that it was broken up, it just was a different lineup. So even at the same show, you may place different in different classes. It just depends on who's in your class, and even your performance. I mean, you could go up there twice, and maybe the first time you were super nervous and you weren't hitting your poses right. And then the second time you went out, you calmed down and settled down and hit everything appropriately. And actually, one of those athletes that I was giving the example of, she hadn't, we weren't there. I was watching the live stream. She was one of our athletes, and she hadn't been drinking water. And I'm like, why is she flat? So I messaged one of our other coaches, and they ran back. She hadn't drank enough water yet. So they had her drink some water. When she came back, she looked a lot fuller and things like that. So there's just a lot of variables. There's so many variables. So at the end of the day, I think, our advice here is, take advantage of the feedback, filter it, take it for what it's worth, and then, keep working on it. And the one last thing I'm just going to kind of throw in there is, work on training your own eye.
Right.
Show up to shows even when you're not competing, and look and see if you can figure out, I'll test myself. I'll be at a show and I'll go, okay, I'd move this person here and I'd move this person there. And then the judges will be doing the movements and things. And a lot of times it's like perfectly aligned with exactly what's in my head of, what they're going to do. And that's just time and energy and effort putting into training my eye and seeing what the judging panels are going to do. And you can do this for yourself too. Take your pictures and compare it to whoever won your class, whoever won the overall. Keeping in mind too, though, that, each show, the ideal may not be at that show. So just because someone won it, that doesn't mean that's the ultimate ideal. But start to kind of figure out, like, what is it that the judges are wanting to see? And I think that really helps. I know when I first started, I had no idea what they were looking at. I was up there just doing my thing and hoping I was winning, and I didn't quite understand it. And so it took that time and effort and studying, to really be able to get good at understanding specifically what the criteria is and how that looks ultimately.
I love that perspective, and I don't know if I'm going to disagree with it a little bit or just add something to it, which is we are never objective about how we look. And so I shouldn't say never and always, because those are I try not to live in.
I was going to say never is a big word, because I have some athletes that are actually really good
You're
about
right.
being able to do what I described, and some people can't. But I mean, I definitely wouldn't say never.
Fair enough. So so in summary, then, if we add these 4 points up, which is first, prepare yourself for the feedback, have that curious mindset, have a meal with you so you can be in line, set that expectations with your family, and have your photos ready to go if you have them, so that you can get that feedback. The second point is ask questions on those 3 criteria: shape, conditioning, and presentation. Make sure that if you're getting a word or words that you don't understand, follow up and ask, what do you mean by that? And can you help me understand a little bit more about what you're seeing? I think if you put it in those words, help me understand what you saw or what you are seeing, that becomes less contentious than, well, I don't look that way, or I don't agree with that. Just your goal in this conversation with the judge is to get their perspective, not to give them yours. So let's set that out as the objective. The third point is apply the feedback, and the fourth is train your own eye. I think those are the 4 prior major points on this. You agree?
Right. And I just want to drive home that, making sure that the 3 different areas I talked about, make sure you're getting clarity on, whether it's a shape issue, a conditioning issue, or a posing issue. So just making sure you're covering your bases on those 3 areas that are the main areas that you're going to work on improving.
And I think that wraps up this particular episode. Thank you, my love. I appreciate you being with me for this. And remember, be good to yourself.
Be good to each other.
And be safe. And remember to like, comment, subscribe. We do read all the comments. And even if we do not reply, I will tell you that we take the feedback very seriously. And we look at that, and we look for ways that we can evolve and improve what we're presenting to you. I know we got feedback on one of our episodes recently about food freedom, and we did look at that. We didn't respond to it, but it's something that we take into consideration as we think about guests and ways that we can present this to you, this information to you in other episodes. So please do provide it. If we don't give a response, please don't think that we're not reading it, because we are, and we do value it greatly. So thank you for your attention and your time, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you for tuning in to FitBody Lifestyle. We hope today's episode has left you feeling motivated and equipped to tackle your fitness goals, business challenges, and the daily dance of life. Remember to value progress over perfection. Life's tough enough alone. Find the chosen family around you to help you along the way.
If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite streaming platform. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at FitBody Fusion.